Ons internet is vandag verskriklik onstabiel hier op die campus. Hy kom en hy gaan. So as ek julle verloor deur die sessie, dan moet julle net 'n bietjie vasbyt. Ek gaan weer probeer inkom. Our internet is very unstable today. I'm on campus. I don't know why it is like that. It just kicked me out. Now I'm online again, so it might happen again as we go along. Okay, so everybody in the chat box, please, your surname, your initials, and your student number. In die chat box, jou van, jou voorletters en jou studentennommer asseblief. Okay, let's go. Nou, die heel eerste ding, kom ons praat gou oor die week se werk. Die week se werk is studie eenheid 4 en ek het gister begin en ek maak vandag klaar met studie eenheid 4 wat gaan oor kontant en kontant ekwivalente. Nou, ek sal verstaan as jy vir my sê, mevrou Swart, ek wil eerder swart vir donderdag se toets, as wat ek te veel aandag aan studie eenheid 4 gee, en dan sal ek vir jou sê, okay, ek verstaan, maar jy moet weet jy met hierdie werk opvang voordat ons dan weer met klasse begin die 26ste April. En die 26ste April gaan jy 'n Ifundi toets skryf oor studie eenheid 4. So for the English guys, study unit 4 I've started with yesterday and I finish it off. Please mute yourself. Okay, so I can understand if you feel like you rather would use your time to study for the test on Wednesday test on Thursday afternoon, but you must know that you have to do study unit 4 before we're going to start with classes again, full steam on the 26th of April. Now, to make sure that you're going to do the work on study unit 4 that you were supposed to do, you are going to write an Ifundi quiz on study unit 4 on the 26th of April, just to make sure that everybody is on the same footing that they were supposed to be. So the 26th of April, Ifundi quiz on study unit 4. You've got all the study material, you've got all the answers for all the questions on study unit 4. So all you have to do is to study. Guys, please look at the way that we do reconciliations here. We actually understand what we're doing. Not at school when you had things like debit and credit columns and rubbish like that and you didn't understand one single word of what you're doing. So please make sure that you go through all the videos, you understand what's going on there, so that you are able to write a test on bank reconciliations and everything about cash and cash equivalents, not only bank reconciliations. Bank reconciliations is about 60% of it, but that you also can do the other 40%. All right, kom ons praat gou-gou oor die toets van donderdag. Ek het al so vinnig met die Afrikaanse ouens daaroor gepraat, so kom ons praat Engels. Guys, let's talk about the test on Thursday. The test will open up on Ifundi exactly at 3 o'clock the afternoon. Die toets maak presies 3 uur donderdagmiddag oop. Nou, jy gaan 110 minute hê. You will have 110 minutes made up as follows. 90 minutes is reading and writing time. So within 90 minutes, 90 minutes, you will have to complete 3 questions. It is not multi-choice questions. It is proper questions like your homework questions in all the study units. So daar gaan 3 vrae wees. It counts out of 50 marks. Tel uit 50 punte uit. And it's the same story than what you've done for the assignments. I will upload on Ifundi the full test. So 3 o'clock when you go into Ifundi, you will see there's an attachment uploaded on Ifundi for you. Obviously, you have to download the attachment. It will be a Word document. So you're going to download the Word document. Once you've downloaded the Word document, if you prefer to print it out for yourself, there is definitely time for that, because that is part of your 20 minutes technical time or technological time. and then you can start answering the questions. So it is your choice. If you want to download, you have to download, obviously, the paper. If you want to print the paper, I'm sure there's more than enough time to do so, and then you can work on a printed version. Obviously, you must have printing facilities if you want to print the paper. Okay, 3 questions, 50 marks. It counts out of 50 marks. You have, listen carefully, 0.3 minutes per mark reading time, 1.5 minutes per mark writing time. So that will give you 1.8 minutes to answer the questions in the paper. You will see on the front page of the paper, I'll give you question 1 and the subject, question 2, the subject, question 3, the subject, plus the mark allocation. And next to the mark allocation, how much time you should spend on each and every question. Now listen very carefully to me. You will have to write to get it done within 90 minutes. There's no time to wonder what I have to do. You must know what you are doing. If your time has run out on a question, let's assume our first question counts 10 marks, so you have 18 minutes reading and writing time for that question. So let's assume that you are about 98% done with that question, but your 18 minutes has run out. Then you stop working on that question and you move on to the next question. And I know it's a terrible thing for most of us to do, to leave something hanging in the air and continue with something new, especially if you know that you knew the answer, you know exactly, you just needed some little more time to round it off completely. In accounting, you only allocate the time that you have to a question, and once that time is run out, you will move forward to the next question. If you can later on save some time on a question, then you can go back to the question which you ran out of time with. But you, as soon as your time is finished on a question, you have to move forward to the next question. Okay. Then there is 20 minutes for scanning the paper, obviously your answer, scanning that answer, upload that answer in Ifundi, and then emailing that answer to that email address that you've used for your assignments. Now, I will provide that email address once more again for you. You do not email me to my NWU address. Guys, I will not open that email at all. Now, that email, let us talk about that email. That email is just a mechanism that I can refer to if Ifundi experience problems to upload your answer within the set time limit. That is the reason why that email must reach me within this 110 minutes that you have to complete the test. If I'm going to receive your email after that 110 minutes have expired, then I can deduct 5 marks for every minute that I received that paper after the time has expired. So that is really just in emergency cases where for some reason Ifundi did not want to upload your answer. So the main thing and the important thing is Ifundi. So once you've scanned the paper, you will start uploading that paper on Ifundi. Whilst Ifundi is busy uploading your paper, you can email that paper to me to that ACCC1 NWU Gmail account. Okay, so it's important, first upload on Ifundi, and whilst it's uploaded, then you will send it to email it for me to the set email address. Please follow the instructions that I've sent through that you have to follow for the assignments. So you are going to save your uploaded answers in one PDF document. Now listen carefully, the name of that PDF document must be, again, your surname, then your initial, and then your student number. The name is not test 1. The name of the file is not ACCC. The name of the file that you're going to upload on Ifundi is your surname, then your initial, and then your student number. That is the name of your file. That is also the particulars that you have to insert in the subject line of the email that you're going to send. So the email you're going to send is going to the name of that email. It's not test one or whatever fancy thing you want to call it. That will be your own surname, your initials, and your student number. I hope you have it. Okay. Guys, this is a big test. It's not an Ifundi quiz. It's not multiple choice. It's not easy. You have to think very carefully in answering that question. I'm going to go very quickly through the work, what you should know, what is the essence of the stuff that you should know. So we leave that for last. If I give you a certain format that you have to follow in answering your question, like with the equation, the accounting equation stuff that we've done, for example, you have to use the format that I give you in the paper. If you're going to use your own format, then I will not mark that question and you will get 0 out of whatever it's going to count. So if I give you a certain format in which your question should be answered in, you have to follow that format. Otherwise, your answer for that question will not be marked and you will receive around 0 for that question. Good. There was a mistake on Brundle, guys. Somewhere along the line, the asset realization account ended up in equity. Asset realization accounts, when I'm going to dispose of an asset, should always form part of my assets. By Brundle, julle was daar 'n fout gewees iewers in die antwoord. Daar was 'n bateverkoop gewees. En in die bateverkoop of die baterealisasierekening, daardie rekening het verskyn onder ekwiteit. Daai rekening, dames en here, moet verskyn onder bates. Ek het die antwoord reg gemaak, so die korrekte antwoord vir Brundle lê nou op Ifundi. So I have rectified the answer. So the correct answer for Brundle is on Ifundi. Good. The instructions that you have to follow when you're going to upload the test, make sure that you have a cover page. I will send you a template of a cover page. So complete the cover page as far as possible before you're going to start with your answer script. Also, if you think you're going to use 5 folio pages, mark your folio pages beforehand, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. With each and every page, your surname, initials, and student number must appear. So that in the meantime, before you can actually start writing, you can put that on top of each and every page that you think you're going to use for test purposes. So dan sê jy kan jou admin afhandel baie vroeg al voordat jy 3 uur begin met die toets. As jy dink jy gaan 5 bladsye gebruik in jou antwoordstel, skryf so lank heel bo aan elke bladsy jou van, jou voorletters en jou studentenommer. Ook vul so lank jou cover page, jou dekblad in. Jy kan nog net nie invul hoeveel bladsye jy gaan gebruik nie, maar vul hom so lank in tot waar hy is, sodat wanneer jy jou toets skryf, dat jy onmiddellik kan begin met jou toetse antwoord. So guys, do whatever you can do beforehand. When you start writing your test, you can immediately start with that, with all the admin out of the way. Remember, I only need 1 PDF file. I don't want a separate PDF file for each and every answer that you're going to submit. I need 1 PDF file. All right. I think that's it. I want to show you now what you should focus on for this test or exam. Can you guys see it?
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, guys, let's have a look. What should you actually focus on? What is the essence of the stuff that we've done in study units 1 to 3? Because you're writing on everything that we've done study units 1 to 3, which obviously includes my book, chapters 1 to 8. Now, when we start with the conceptual framework, What is important in the conceptual framework? Number one, you should know what is the purpose of financial statements and financial information. Jy moet weet wat die doel van finansiële state en van finansiële inligting. The second thing that you should know is what statements are included in a set of financial statements. What are we talking about? Waarvan praat ons as ons van 'n stel finansiële state praat? Ons praat van die staat van finansiële posisie, staat van wins of verlies, ander omvattende inkomste, staat van verandering ekwiteit, die kontantvloeistaat en aantekeninge tot die finansiële state. We're talking about the statement of financial position, statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income, statement of changes in equity, the cash flow statement, and notes to our financial statements. You should know the underlying assumptions on which financial statements are based on. Jy moet die onderliggende veronderstellings ken waarop finansiële state op gebaseer is. Nou ons weet dat dit is ons lopende saakbeginsel en ons toevallingsbeginsel, being our going concern principle and our accrual principle. You must be able to identify that and talk about that. You should know what is the fundamental qualitative characteristics of financial statements. Jy moet weet wat is die fundamentele kwalitatiewe eienskappe van finansiële state. En jy moet weet dat onder daai fundamentele state praat ons van toepaslikheid en ons praat van getroue weergawe. En jy moet weet dat hierdie toepaslikheid en getroue weergawe onder die karaktereienskappe iets anders is as die toepaslikheid en getroue weergawe waar ons praat oor erkenningskriteria. So you should know that fundamental qualitative characteristics is all about relevance and faithful representation. And you should know that this relevance and faithful presentation is different from the relevance and faithful presentation that we are talking about when we are doing the recognition criteria based on some kind of element in the financial statements. Here we talk about relevance as predictive value, confirmatory value, voorspellings of bevestigingswaarde. You should know what it means, you should know what it stands for, and you should be able to talk about that and give me examples of that. Jy moet ook weet wat is die aard van 'n item en die wesenlikheid van 'n item. You should know the nature of items and materiality. What does materiality means? You must be able to give me examples of that. You must be able to talk about that. You should know that faithful representation as a fundamental qualitative characteristic is all about completeness of financial statements, the neutrality of the basis on which financial statements are being set up should be free from bias, so it should be totally objective, no subjectivity, so dit moet onpartydig wees en neutraal wees. Goed, dan moet ons ook sê dit moet vry van foute wees. It should be free from error, and you should be able to talk about that. You should also be able, obviously you must distinguish between fundamental qualitative characteristics and enhancing qualitative characteristics. Jy moet kan onderskei tussen fundamentele kwalitatiewe eienskappe en ondersteunende kwalitatiewe eienskappe. So if I ask you the one, you mustn't discuss the other one. So if jy die een vra, dan bespreek jy nie die ander een nie. Jy kyk mooi wat ek vra en jy antwoord wat ek jou vra. That's very important that you should read carefully what is required from you and you answer what is required, not what you think is required or not what you've studied and you really want to show me that you know all this other stuff. I'm very proud of you, but if I didn't ask it, you should not answer it because you're just wasting your time. You will not get one single mark for your attempt. So please answer what is asked, what is required from you. Goed, so ondersteunende kwalitatiewe eienskappe gaan dit oor vergelykbaarheid, bevestigbaarheid, tydigheid en verstaanbaarheid. Comparability, verifiability, timeliness and understandability. You should be able to mention that and then to discuss each and every one of those so that I can see that you really understand that. Now, coming back to this again, I will not ask you in a question, just give me the enhancing qualitative characteristics for 8 marks or 10 marks, whatever. I will always give you a scenario. And in the hand of the scenario given, it could be that that whole scenario is about qualitative characteristics. And then I can ask you to, on the hand of the scenario that I gave you, to discuss all the fundamental as well as the enhancing qualitative characteristics. So ek gaan nooit vir jou net 'n vraag vra en sê, gee vir my die kwalitatiewe eienskappe nie. Ek gaan vir jou 'n scenario skets. Uit daai scenario gaan daar so definitief vasgelê hierdie kwalitatiewe eienskappe wees en dan kan ek vir jou vra aan die hand van die scenario wat ek vir jou gegee het om vir my te bespreek watter fundamentele kwalitatiewe eienskappe of watter ondersteunende kwalitatiewe eienskappe, daar's 'n ander woord vir dit is versterkende kwalitatiewe eienskappe, kom na vore aan die hand van die scenario wat geskets is. Now, and if I ask you something like that, how are you going to answer a question like that? Hoe gaan jy so 'n vraag beantwoord? Number one, you will put down the theory. So you will mention the fundamental qualitative characteristics are the following. A, relevance. Under relevance, we talk about predictive value, blah, 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 blah. And then you're going to say application. And then you're going to apply this theory to the scenario given to you. So jy gaan voor sê die fundamentele kwalitatiewe eienskappe gaan oor toepaslikheid, dit gaan oor voorspellings, bevestigingswaarde en aard en wesenlikheid van items. En dan gaan jy daardie goed wat jy nou vir my die teorie voorgegee het, gaan jy onmiddellik moet toepas op die scenario wat ek vir jou gegee het. So, guys, and in all scenarios and all these theory questions, somewhere there must be a conclusion. So jy moet altyd onthou oor daar moet 'n gevolgtrekking iewers te wees. The definitions of the elements of the financial statements. Then you should be able to do the definition criteria of each and every element. Now, what are the elements? The elements are income, expenses, assets, liabilities, and equity. Those 5 are the elements of financial statements. So you must know the definition criteria. And once again, I won't ask you straight away. I will give you a scenario. Out of the scenario, it must be clear that I'm talking about liabilities. You must identify the liability, and then when I'm asking you to discuss whether they must recognize this element in the financial statements, you will start off to say the elements applicable to this scenario is, for instance, liabilities. The definition criteria of a liability is whatever. Then you're going to apply it to scenario, and it's either going to meet the definition criteria or not. If it's going to meet the definition criteria, you will move on to the recognition criteria. Because the first one in the recognition criteria is that that element must adhere to the definition criteria. So if that answers it, yes, then you move on to the recognition criteria. Again, now it's relevance and faithful representation, but it's all about uncertainties. Uncertainties about the existence of the element, uncertainties about the amount, the measurement of the element, the uncertainty surrounding the flow of future economic benefits. That is what that is all about. So you're going to discuss that, you're going to apply that, whatever you've discussed, on the scenario given, and you will end up with a conclusion. I can also ask you, do you recognition of some kind of elements, either an asset or liability in the financial statements? And there you must also be able to talk about derecognition criteria, and you must apply that to the scenario. You have examples of all of this in your homework questions, and if you want more examples, you go to the test toetsen tab on your Fundi. All the old exam papers and test papers are lying there. That is worth something. So dames en here, as jy nog oefeninge wil hê, dan gaan jy na toetsen test toe op die Fundi. Al die ou eksamen en toetsvraestelle lê daar. Just a word of warning. The conceptual framework changed from 2019 onwards. It actually changed in 2018, but we've changed our course from 2019 onwards. So the answers for 2019 and 2020, those answers are correct because it's based on the new conceptual framework. The answers given in the memos for all papers before 2019 is still based on the old conceptual framework, and you will not get marks. So the principles of the question is exactly the same. The answer will look slightly different, but the conclusions will be the same. But make sure that when you're actually looking at those memos, that you apply the new conceptual framework on those questions. Very important. Then measurement of elements, die meting van elemente. Then you should note that the measurement basis that we are allowed to use according to the conceptual framework is historical cost and current value. And under current value, we talk about fair value, value in use or fulfillment value, and current cost. Fair value is more market-related prices. Value in use is the present value of future cash flow, the economic benefits that we can get out of an asset. Fulfillment value is the present value of all payments that's going to take place in future. Current cost is what will the entity receive or pay for a similar kind of asset or liability in their books, which is currently in their books. So jy moet weet wat is historiese koste, jy moet weet wat is huidige waarde, jy moet weet dat huidige waarde opgebreek word tussen billike waarde, waarde in gebruik as dit 'n bate is en vervullingswaarde as dit 'n las is en huidige koste. Billike waarde is wat is die markverwante prys van 'n item tans. Waarde in gebruik is die huidige waarde, is die verdiskonteerde waarde met ander woorde van toekomstige ekonomiese voordele as dit 'n bate is, of die huidige waarde, die verdiskonteerde waarde van toekomstige ekonomiese uitvloei van kontant wat gaan plaasvind. Huidige koste is die bedrag wat die onderneming sal ontvang vir 'n bate wat hy tans in sy besit het, wat op sy finansiële state verskyn, of 'n las wat hy tans besit as hy daardie las tans vandag sal moet gaan aflos. Dan moet jy vir my studie eenheid 3 gaan oor basiese rekenkundige inskrywings. Jy moet weet hoe lyk 'n eenvoudige rekenkundige inskrywing. Jy moet ook rekenkundige inskrywings in die rekenkundige vergelyking kan gaan aantoon. Jy moet aansuiwerings kan maak op jaareinde. Met ander woorde, jy moet weet wat die verskil tussen 'n vooraansuiveringsproefbalans, wat gebeur met 'n vooraansuiveringsproefbalans, hoe werk ek na 'n na-aansuiveringsproefbalans toe en hoe stel ek my finansiële state van die na-aansuiveringsproefbalans op. Jy moet daardie rekenkundige transaksies in die rekenkundige vergelyking kan skryf en jy moet daai aansuiwerings van uitgawes kan doen en of van inkomste kan doen. Nou uitgawes kan of vooruit betaal of opgeloop wees. Inkomste kan of vooruit ontvang of opgeloop wees en in al hierdie goeders moet jy die impak van BTW ook kan te boek staan. Well, so study unit 3 we've done basic accounting entries. So you should be able to do basic accounting entries, and that is actually what my book chapters 1 to 8 is all about, basic accounting entries. And that is why it's so important that you understand exactly what is happening in chapters 1 to 8 in my book. Now, what is also important in my book is what is the impact of that on subsidiary journals? Dis baie belangrik dat jy weet, as ek dink aan Myburg, die handboek, dat jy weet wat is die impak van BTW op jou hulpjoernale, wat is 'n hulpjoernaal, kontantontvangste, kontantbetalings, etc. So it's very important that you understand how does your subsidiary journal, the look of your subsidiary journal and the wording of your subsidiary journal change when I'm starting and introducing that to the scenario. Make sure that you know that. Make sure that you know how the booking from the subsidiary journal to the ledger at the end of the month is going to look with a VAT included in that. And make sure that you know how the individual line items are going to be posted if there is VAT involved. Good, so over about basic accounting entries, you should know how the accounting equation works, how you are going to account for any entry in the accounting equation format. Now here it's important that you follow the format that the question gives you. It can either be pluses and minuses, it can be debits and credits, it can be whatever. Make sure that you follow the instructions very carefully. Then you should be able to know the difference between a pre-adjustment trial balance. You should know what kind of adjustments go through in order to prepare a post-adjustment trial balance. Now, there are certain adjusting entries that takes place on expenses and income items at the end of the financial year. On expenses, you can either identify prepaid expenses or accrued expenses. You must be able to record those kind of adjustment entries with and without VAT. Under income items, I can either have income received in advance or I can have income receivable or accrued income. So I'm entitled on the income, but I haven't received it as yet at year end. You should know exactly how to record those kind of transactions with or without VAT. So it's very important that when the entity that you're working with is a VAT vendor, then VAT will then come into play in all of these transactions. So as my entiteit waarmee ek werk, die onderneming waarmee ek werk, 'n BTW ondernemer is, gaan BTW hier oral ter sprake kom. Let's talk quickly about VAT again. Now, in the statement of profit or loss, we've said to each other that no income or expense item will ever include VAT. Geen inkomste of uitgawerekening gaan ooit BTW insluit nie. So as jy 'n inkomste staat van wins of verlies en ander omvattende inkomste moet opstel, moet jy weet dat al daardie items wat daar lê, geen BTW sal insluit nie. In my staat van finansiële posisie, Kukuletsu Maleka, please mute yourself. In a statement of financial position, what items will include VAT? Guys, the items that will have a VAT component in would be debtors. Why? Because the debtor owes me the full invoice amount and invoices include VAT. Simultaneously, creditors, those creditors' outstanding balances will include VAT. Why? Because I owe the supplier the invoice amount which will include VAT. And in my bank account, whenever I receive an amount of money, or whenever I pay an amount of money, it will be inclusive of VAT, if obviously VAT is applicable on the item. So debiteure, krediteure en bank gaan altyd 'n BTW komponent insluit. That means that you have to go and look at the debtors journals, the creditors journals, as well as the cash book receipts and cash book payments journals, and see what is the impact of that. Met ander woorde gaan kyk na debiteure, krediteure, kontantontvangste en kontantbetalingsjoernale om te gaan kyk wat is die impak van BTW op inskrywings wat nou deur daardie joernale gaan. All other assets and liabilities will be exclusive of VAT. Alle ander items, alle ander bate en laste en ekwiteit items gaan BTW uitsluit. Die BTW-kontrolerekening gaan suiwer oor BTW. So dit sluit nie BTW in of uit nie, dit is gelyk aan BTW. The VAT control account equals VAT. So that would be my VAT input and VAT output. So that obviously is only the VAT portion of transactions concluded in the VAT period. Dis belangrik dat jy dit ook verstaan. Equity. If the owner took merchandise for own use, then the drawings figure, the amount that will be posted to the drawings account, will be the cost price of the goods that he took, plus the VAT on the cost price of the goods that he has taken, because you have to repay the receiver of revenue the VAT previously claimed on those items when you purchased the inventory items. So the drawings then will include a little bit of VAT, but that VAT is not on the transaction. That VAT is to repay the receiver of revenue the VAT previously claimed from him on the merchandise when you bought it. So, ouens, luister baie mooi. Waar die eienaar voorraad vir eie gebruik neem, dan moet daar BTW op daardie kosprys van die voorraad wat hy neem bereken word, en na my trekkingsrekening gaan dan die kosprys van die voorraad plus die BTW op daardie voorraad item se kosprys na die trekkingsrekening toe gepos word. Maar daardie BTW is nie op die transaksie nie. Daardie BTW is die BTW wat ek nou moet terugbetaal aan die ontvanger. En ek het daardie BTW geëis by die ontvanger toe ek die voorraad items aangekoop het. Omdat ek daardie voorraad items nou nooit gaan verkoop nie, met ander woorde ek gaan nooit BTW uitset op hulle verdien nie. Nou sê die ontvanger vir inkomste, Daai BTW wat jy destyds geëis het, toe jy die voorraad aangekoop het, dit moet jy nou aan my terugbetaal. So dit is hoekom daar BTW ter sprake is wanneer die eienaar goedere vir homself neem. Dit gaan nie oor die transaksie van die goedere vir homself neem nie. Dit gaan oor die terugbetaling van die BTW wat voorheen geëis was aan die ontvanger van inkomste, maar daai transaksie sluit dan ook 'n komponent BTW in. So wees versigtig vir hom. When an owner takes cash for himself out of the entity, there's no VAT involved. As 'n eienaar kontant vir homself neem uit die besigheid, is daar geen BTW ter sprake nie. Now, whenever you work with VAT, and whenever there's VAT applicable in a question, before you start doing some fancy calculations, the very first step always is to remove the VAT. So jy verwyder altyd eers die BTW en dan werk jy met daai transaksie verder, dan doen jy verdere berekeninge en dan bepaal jy wat moet gebeur in daardie transaksie. What is VAT input? VAT input is on expenses and payments. We claim it back from source and it always has a debit balance. And VAT, guys, is a statement of financial position account. BTW inset, uitgawes en betalings, waarop ek dan BTW kan terugeis van die ontvanger van inkomste. Dit is altyd 'n debit saldo want die ontvanger skuld my daai geld terug en dis 'n bate in die staat van finansiële posisie. VAT output. VAT output is applicable on all income and receipts of a VAT vendor, and the VAT vendor has to pay over to source the amount of VAT included in that income or receipt. So that will have a credit balance in the statement of financial position. Why? Because the entity has an obligation to its source to pay over the VAT to them. BTW uitset. Dit word gehef op alle inkomstes en ontvangstes wat 'n onderneming maak. Daardie BTW word gevorder namens die ontvanger van inkomste deur die onderneming en dit moet dan oorbetaal word aan die ontvanger van inkomste. So dit het 'n kredietsaldo in die staat van finansiële posisie, is 'n las. So hoekom is dit 'n las? Want die onderneming het 'n verpligting om daardie geld oor te betaal aan die ontvanger. Nou dames en here, hier is 'n aantal scenario's wat jy kan onderskei van mekaar. Dis al wat jy kan kry. Daar's 4 scenario's by BTW wat jy moet kan onderskei en dan sal jy weet hoe om die transaksie deur te sit. As there are 4 scenarios with VAT. Once you've identified the scenario that you're working with, then it's easy to do the accounting entries. So the first step is to check which one of the 4 scenarios is applicable to the question that you are doing. The first one is the entity is a VAT vendor and the entity buys from another VAT vendor. Die entiteit is 'n BTW ondernemer en hy koop aan van 'n ander BTW ondernemer. What does the transaction looks like then? I'm a VAT vendor, I buy from another VAT vendor. If I buy from a VAT vendor, that guy will issue a VAT invoice to me. Because I'm a VAT vendor, I can claim the VAT. So I'm going to debit, if it's an asset that I bought from that third party, I'm going to debit the asset with a VAT exclusive amount, or I'm going to debit an expense if it's just, let's say, I've paid my internet account. Internet is an expense account, but the invoice that I will receive from the Wi-Fi provider, whatever, is going to be a VAT inclusive invoice. So I'm going to debit either the asset if it's an asset, or the expense if it's an expense with a VAT exclusive amount. Then I'm going to debit the VAT I'm going to claim back from the receiver of revenue. I have received a VAT invoice. On the VAT invoice, there is VAT. I can claim that VAT that I have to pay back from the receiver of revenue. And then I'm going to credit the creditor if I haven't paid it as yet, or I can credit bank with what? With the invoice amount, and the invoice amount will always include VAT. So as ek 'n BTW ondernemer is en ek koop van 'n ander BTW ondernemer, beteken dit dat daai ou kan vir my 'n belastingfaktuur uitreik. Omdat ek 'n BTW ondernemer is, kan ek die belasting gaan eis wat op daardie BTW faktuur voorkom. So wanneer so 'n transaksie plaasvind, gaan ek die bate, as ek 'n bate aangekoop het van hom, debiteer met die BTW uitgesluite prys. As dit bloot net 'n uitgawe is wat ek betaal het, kom sê ek my internetuitgawes of kostes vir die maand betaal, dan gaan daai internetuitgawe rekening dan die BTW uitgeslote bedrag wees. Die bedrag wat op die faktuur verskyn as BTW kan ek eis van die ontvanger van inkomste. So ek debiteer BTW inset en ek krediteer die krediteurs wat ek nou nog nie, as ek hom nog nie betaal het nie, met die volle faktuurbedrag wat altyd BTW sal insluit. Ek het gekoop van 'n BTW-ondernemer, so ek gaan altyd hom die BTW ook skuld. So daai faktuur gaan altyd BTW insluit. As ek hierdie ding dadelik betaal het, sal ek nie 'n krediteur gekrediteer het nie, maar sou ek my bank gekrediteer het, ook met die BTW ingeslote prys. The second scenario. The entity that I'm working with is not a VAT vendor, but he buys from a VAT vendor. So die entiteit waarmee ek werk is nie 'n BTW-ondernemer nie, maar hy gaan koop iets aan van 'n ou wat vir BTW geregistreer is. Now, once I buy from a VAT vendor, that guy can issue a VAT invoice. As ek van 'n BTW-ondernemer aankoop, daai ouetjie wat 'n BTW-ondernemer is, hy kan 'n BTW-faktuur uitreik. Maar onthou nou, as ek nie 'n BTW-ondernemer is nie, met ander woorde ek is nie geregistreer vir BTW nie, kan ek die BTW eis nie. So if I am not a VAT vendor, it means I'm not registered for VAT and it means I can never claim the VAT, regardless of the fact that I have received a VAT invoice. Now what now? Then if it's an asset that I've purchased, I will debit the asset with a VAT inclusive amount, i.e. the invoiced amount. I will credit the creditor with the full invoiced amount, which will always include VAT. If it was a service or an expense that I have incurred, let's say that my internet provider is not a VAT vendor. Oh, he's a VAT vendor, but I'm not a VAT vendor, and I receive my internet invoice from him at the end of the month. So he's the VAT vendor, I'm not a VAT vendor. Then it means I cannot claim the VAT. So then I will debit my expense account, internet expenses, with a full invoice amount, inclusive of VAT. I cannot claim the VAT. So what is the amount that I'm going to pay to the internet provider? The full invoice amount. So my expense amount will now be the full invoice amount according what I have received from him. So as ek byvoorbeeld my internet vir die maand gaan betaal en my internetverskaffer is 'n BTW-ondernemer, maar ek is nie 'n BTW-ondernemer nie. Dan gaan my internetuitgawe rekening die faktuurbedrag wees, met ander woorde die BTW ingesluite bedrag wees, want ek kan dit nie gaan eis nie. En my krediteur of my bankrekening wat gekrediteer gaan word, gaan dan ook die volle faktuurbedrag wees. Aan die ander woorde dit wat BTW gaan insluit. Ek kan dit nie eis nie, maar ek moet nog die volle faktuurbedrag gaan terugbetaal aan die BTW, aan die ou wat die diens verskaf het. The derde scenario, the third scenario, the entity is a VAT vendor. So the entity that I'm working with is a VAT vendor, and it sells some merchandise to another VAT vendor. So ek is 'n BTW-ondernemer en ek verkoop my handelsware aan 'n ander BTW-ondernemer. As ek 'n BTW-ondernemer is, dan moet ek 'n belastingfaktuur uitreik. If I'm a VAT vendor, I have to issue a VAT invoice. Now, if I have issued a VAT invoice, it doesn't matter whether the other party is a VAT vendor or not. The receiver of revenue says, you are the VAT vendor, and on everything that you're going to sell, you have to erase VAT on that item. So I will debit the debtor, the guy to whom I have sold that merchandise, with the invoiced amount, which will always be a VAT inclusive amount. I will credit sales with a VAT exclusive amount, and I'm going to credit VAT output with a VAT included on the VAT invoice. So ek is 'n BTW-ondernemer, ek verkoop aan 'n ander BTW-ondernemer. Die ontvanger van inkomste sê waar dit gaan, as jy die BTW-ondernemer is, dan gee ek nie om of die teenparty 'n BTW-ondernemer is al dan nie. Hy sê, wat jy moet doen is, jy is die ou wat die belastingfaktuur uitreik. Jy is die ou, op daai belastingfaktuur moet daar BTW op verskyn. So dit beteken, jy moet daardie BTW wat daarop gaan verskyn, aan my oorbetaal. Ek gee nie om of die teenparty vir BTW geregistreer is al dan nie. Is hy dan vir BTW geregistreer, mooi so vir hom. Maar in my boeke gaan ek sê, debiteer die debiteur met die volle faktuurbedrag wat altyd BTW sal insluit, krediteer verkope met die BTW uitgesluite bedrag, dis my inkomsterekening, en krediteer BTW uitset, dis 'n staat van finansiële posisie rekening, wat dan 'n lasterekening is in my boeke. Nou, ek weet nie of julle hierdie ouetjie kan sien nie. Kom ons kyk of ek hierdie ding geskuif kan kry. Nou, so, daai ingeskuif kan kry. Waar's hy? En ons kyk of ek daai ingeskuif kan kry. Daai wil nie skuif. Daar skuif hy. Here I can't count, this must be 4. The entity is a non-VAT vendor and it sells to a VAT vendor. Die entiteit is nie 'n BTW-ondernemer nie, maar hy verkoop sy goedere aan 'n BTW-ondernemer. Guys, if the entity that you're working with is a non-VAT vendor, he can never issue a VAT invoice. Therefore, and is not registered for VAT, so therefore he's never going to pay VAT output to the receiver of revenue. He is not registered for VAT. So therefore, ja, meneer Grobler, asseblief, vat jou goed weg. The entity is a non-VAT vendor. So therefore, I'm going to debit debtors with the invoice amount, and that invoice amount will never be a VAT inclusive amount because I cannot issue a VAT invoice. And I'm going to credit sales with the full invoice amount. So, die entiteit nie 'n BTW-ondernemer is nie, kan hy nooit as 'n nimmer goed aan 'n BTW-ondernemer kan hy nooit as 'n nimmer 'n belastingfaktuur uitreik nie. Omdat hy nooit 'n belastingfaktuur kan uitreik nie, beteken dit daar's nooit, en hy's ook geregistreer vir BTW nie, so hy gaan nooit BTW oorbetaal aan die ontvanger van inkomste nie. So in so 'n geval gaan my debiteur dan gelykstaande wees aan die faktuurbedrag soos altyd, maar my verkope gaan ook gelykstaande wees aan die faktuurbedrag, want daar is geen BTW ter sprake op daardie ding nie. Okay, nou hier is die laaste enetjie. Let's move this again. And let's move that again. The entity is a VAT vendor, and now it sells to a non-VAT vendor. Dit maak dis nie saak nie. It doesn't matter, guys. I've just said that the receiver of revenue says, if you are a VAT vendor, on everything that you're going to receive, all income and all amounts that is receivable, you have to pay VAT to me. So I'm going to debit the debtor account with a full invoice amount, which will include VAT. I will credit sales with a VAT exclusive amount, and I'm going to credit VAT output with a VAT which appears on the VAT invoice. I'm a VAT vendor, so I have to issue a VAT invoice. Therefore, there is VAT that I have to pay over to the receiver of revenue as VAT output VAT. So ek is 'n BTW-ondernemer, maar verkoop aan 'n nie BTW-ondernemer, dan vang van inkomste sê ek stel nie aan jou house belang nie. Ek sê vir jou, as jy geregistreer is vir BTW, dan moet jy 'n belastingfaktuur uitreik. En dan daardie belasting wat op daardie belastingfaktuur, daai BTW wat op die belastingfaktuur verskyn, daardie BTW moet aan my oorbetaal word. So ek gaan die debiteer, gaan ek dan debiteer met die volle faktuurbedrag wat altyd BTW sal insluit. Ek gaan verkope krediteer met die BTW uitgesluite bedrag en ek gaan 'n BTW uitsetrekening krediteer met die BTW wat op daardie faktuur verskyn. Nou hierdie selfde reëls geld ook by eiendom, aanleg en toerusting. Guys, these same rules apply to property, plant and equipment. When I buy property, plant and equipment and I am a VAT vendor and I buy from a VAT vendor, I can claim the VAT. As ek 'n BTW-ondernemer is en ek koop 'n nuwe bedryfsbates soos eiendom, aanleg en toerusting aan van 'n ander BTW-ondernemer, dan kan ek die BTW gaan eis. So die kosprys vir my eiendom, aanleg en toerusting gaan 'n BTW uitgesluite bedrag wees. The cost price of my property, plant and equipment will then be a VAT exclusive amount because I'm a VAT vendor, I bought from another VAT vendor, I've claimed the VAT. So the cost price of my property, plant and equipment would be VAT exclusive. If I am not a VAT vendor and I buy property, plant and equipment from a VAT vendor, I am not a VAT vendor, so I can never claim VAT. So the value of the asset that I've purchased from the VAT vendor will equal the invoice value. So if there is VAT on that invoice, and there will be because I bought from a VAT vendor, I'm going to capitalize that VAT as part of the cost price of the item that I've bought. Ek koop vir eiendom, aanleg en toerusting item aan van 'n persoon wat 'n BTW ondernemer is. Ek is nie geregistreer vir BTW nie. Die kosprys van daardie bate wat ek aankoop, gaan nou die faktuurprys wees, want ek kan nie die BTW eis nie. So met ander woorde, ek gaan dan my bate debiteer met die volle faktuurprys en op die faktuur gaan daar staan, BTW uitgesluit 'n bedrag R100 plus R15, BTW is gelyk aan R115. So my bate wat ek gaan kapitaliseer, gaan R115 wees, want ek kan nie die BTW gaan eis nie. Guys, if I receive, I'm not a VAT vendor, I buy from a VAT vendor, the invoice that is going to issue is for R115, then I'm going to debit my asset account with R115 and create creditors or bank with R115, the VAT inclusive amount. As ek eiendom, aanleg en toerusting aankoop, en ek is 'n BTW ondernemer, maar ek koop van 'n nie BTW ondernemer daardie eiendom, aanleg en toerusting aan. Kan daardie ou vir my belastingfaktuur uitreik? Nee, hy kan nie, want hy is nie geregistreer vir BTW nie. In so 'n geval gaan ek ook die faktuurwaarde kapitaliseer as die kosprys van die bate. So ek is 'n BTW ondernemer, ek koop van iemand aan wat nie 'n BTW ondernemer is nie. Die waarde van die faktuur wat hy vir my uitreik is R115. Ek gaan bates debiteer met R115 en krediteer of bankkrediteer met R115. Guys, I am a VAT vendor. I buy a property, plant or equipment item from a non-VAT vendor. Let's assume the invoice value is R115. What am I going to do? I'm going to debit the asset account with R115 and I'm going to credit creditors or bank with R115. Why R115? That's the invoice value. I cannot claim VAT if I don't have a VAT invoice, and that person from whom I have bought this asset from can never issue a VAT invoice because he is not registered for VAT. This is very important that you understand these rules. All right, kom ons kyk nou wat gaan nou hier aan. Voorraad, inventory, guys. Inventory is extremely important, and it's extremely important that you must be able to distinguish between the inventory systems that you can use. The first system that you can use is the perpetual inventory system. Die eerste tipe voorraadstelsel wat jy kan gebruik is die deurlopende voorraadstelsel. Die ander een wat jy kan gebruik is die periodieke voorraadstelsel. Nou, hoekom dit so belangrik is omdat jou rekenkundige inskrywings verskil tussen die twee stelsels en jy sal verkeerd gemerk word as jy die verkeerde een by die verkeerde een gaan sit. Guys, why is it so important that you understand the difference between a perpetual inventory system and a periodic inventory system is because your accounting entries differ between the two systems. And if you put down the wrong accounting entry, i.e. let's say that you've purchased inventory items and you call it purchases, and I told you it is a perpetual inventory system, you will not get any single mark for that entry because you should have debited inventory and not purchases. Sorry. Just put it off. So let's have a look at the difference. During a perpetual inventory system, I have to update my inventory record with each and every transaction that has an impact on inventory. So that means that all purchases are recorded at cost in the inventory account. So in 'n deurlopende voorraadstelsel beteken dit alle voorraadverwante transaksies moet in die voorraadrekening gedurende die finansiële jaar te boek gestel word. Wanneer ek voorraad items aankoop, gaan dit op die debietkant van die voorraadrekening verskyn. For each and every sales transaction that takes place, I have to update my inventory account. Vir elke liewe verkoopstransaksie wat plaasvind, moet ek my voorraadrekening opdateer. So for those transactions, I'm going to credit my inventory account and debit a cost of sales expense account. So vir daardie tipe items wat plaasvind, wanneer daar 'n verkooptransaksie by 'n deurlopende voorraadstelsel plaasvind, krediteer ek my voorraadrekening en ek debiteer 'n uitgawerekening koste van verkope. Dit is baie belangrik want dit beteken dat die saldo wat oorbly op my voorraadrekening altyd gelykstaande behoort te wees aan die kosprys van voorraad-items wat nog op my rakke is. This is very important because it means that the balance of the inventory account in my general ledger should equal the cost price of items on hand which are still on my shelves, which are still available to be sold. Now, you should know this little little profit formula of us. We say cost price plus profit equals selling price. So the selling price of goods is determined after the entity has decided what profit percentage she's going to add to the cost price of his items. Nou sê jy, is baie belangrik dat jy hierdie winsformuletjie ken. Kosprys plus wins is gelyk aan verkoopprys. So die entiteit besluit wat is die koste wat dan die persentasie wins wat by die kosprys gevoeg moet word om by die verkoopsprys uit te kom. So, kom ons sê dan moet ek besluit ek gaan 20% wins by my kosprys voeg om by die verkoopsprys uit te kom. Och, nee man, dames en here. Hierdie ou soek my dringend. Pause dit 'n oomblik en lees dit deur asseblief. Jerry, ek kan nie nou praat nie. Yes, praat gou. Ek kan. Okay, dis reg so. Okay, Jerry, sien jou dan. Okay, bye. Okay, guys, I do apologize, but it's important. Right, die verkoopprys van goedere word bepaal deur die winsformule. So, as ek vir jou die wins gee op die kosprys, dan is die kosprys 100. If I give you the profit on the cost price, then the cost equals 100. If I give you the gross profit percentage on the selling price, then the selling price is 100. And then your cost price would have been 80. 80 plus 20 equals 100. As ek vir jou die winsformule gee, die bruto winspersentasie gee op die verkoopprys, dan is die verkoopprys 100. In so 'n geval sou my formule dan gelees het 80 plus 20 is 100. So wees baie versigtig dat jy mooi gaan kyk waarop gee ek vir jou die winsopslag. Nou, dit is baie belangrik dat jy weet dat wanneer ek nou 'n regstelling moet maak van my voorraadrekening, dat ek moet werk op my normale verkoopprys. So ek gaan aan my koste van verkope, gaan ek op my normale verkoopsprys vat, ek gaan die BTW met uithaal en dan gaan ek my winsformule op daardie verkoopsprys toepas om die koste van verkope te bereken. Okay guys, what is important that you know that if I give you a sales transaction and I tell you I use the perpetual inventory method, that you have to adjust with every sales transaction, you have to adjust your inventory account. Now, you should know that you have to work with normal selling prices exclusive of that before you're going to apply your profit formula. I'm going to repeat that. When I give you the perpetual inventory system and I give you a sales transaction that took place, you have to adjust your inventory record with the cost price of goods sold. How am I going to calculate the cost price of goods sold? Number one, I have to determine what is the normal selling price of the goods sold. Then I'm going to take the VAT out of the normal selling price of goods sold. And then I'm going to apply my profit formula on that amount to give me the cost price of goods sold. What is a periodic inventory system now? The periodic inventory system says I do not bother with my inventory account until such a time that I'm going to do a physical stock count again. So let's say the entity only does a physical stock count once a year at the financial year end. Right through the year, they do not do any stock counts. That means that my inventory account in my statement of financial position will right through the financial year only have the opening inventory figure in. And no adjustment entries is going to be passed against my inventory account right through the year. When I purchase inventory items during the year, I will take those purchases to a purchases account, an expense account that I call purchases. What do I do at the end of the financial year? At the end of the financial year, I do a physical stock count again. Then I want to update the balance of my inventory account to the value of my stock count. So how am I going to do that? At the end of the financial year, I'm going to take the opening inventory out of the inventory account. In order to do that, inventory is an asset. So if I want to take it out, I'm going to credit the inventory account and I'm going to debit a newly created account that I call cost of sales. So the first entry in my cost of sales account is going to be at year end and it will represent my opening inventory in the beginning of the year. Then I'm going to close off all my purchases account balances and purchase related account balances to my cost of sales account. So this purchases an expense, so it has a debit balance. So if I want to close it off, I'm going to credit the expense account, I'm going to debit the cost of sales account at the end of the financial year. Now at this stage, the purchases account is going to be zero, there's nothing left there. And my inventory account is zero, there's nothing left there. So now I want to post the value of my closing inventory to my inventory account. So I'm going to debit the inventory account and I'm going to credit my cost of sales account. So what is cost of sales then? Opening inventory plus purchases less closing inventory. That would be the balance of my cost of sales account. So during the financial period, all purchases will go to a purchases expense account. During the year, no postings are done against the inventory account. At the end of the year, I'm going to post all these final entries, closing entries to my cost of sales account. So that means if I'm going to have a sales transaction during the year, there will be no adjustment entry between inventory and cost of sales. Cost of sales is going to be only this account that I'm going to create at year end, which is only going to be equal to opening inventory plus purchases less closing inventory. Okay, die Afrikaanse ouens luister nou mooi weer 'n keer. Ons sê by 'n periodieke voorraadstelsel lê my voorraad in my boeke die hele finansiële jaar deur tot tyd en waar ek weer 'n fisiese voorraadopname gaan maak en 'n waarde gaan koppel aan daardie fisiese voorraad voorhande. Nou, dit gebeur tradisioneel slegs een keer 'n jaar en dit is op jaareinde. So vir daai hele finansiële jaar lê voorraad in my boeke teen sy openingsvoorraad bedrag en ek voeder nie weer met my voorraadrekening reg deur die jaar nie. Eers op die einde van die jaar gaan ek inskrywing deursit op my voorraadrekening. Nou, maar wat gebeur nou as ek voorraad items gaan aankoop? Want seker gaan ek voorraad items aankoop deur die jaar wat ek dan gaan verkoop. Wanneer ek voorraad items gaan aankoop, dan gaan ek en ek pos al daardie aankope na uitgawerekening toe wat ek aankope noem. So 'n aankoperekening is slegs van toepassing by die periodieke voorraadstelsel. So ek akkumuleer dan al my aankoopstransaksies in my aankoperekening vir die hele finansiële jaar. Op die einde van die finansiële jaar gaan ek en ek tel my voorraad en ek sit 'n waarde op die voorraad wat ek getel het. Dan sê ek, luister, maar nou my voorraad lê nog in my grootboek teen laasjaar se waarde, die beginvoorraad van die huidige jaar. So my heel eerste stap is om daar beginvoorraad uit my boeke uit te haal. Onthou, is nou op jaareinde, nou gaan ek die eerste dag van hierdie jaareinde se voorraad uit die boeke uithaal vir die eerste keer. Voorraad is 'n bate, so uit 'n debit saldo. So as ek daai bate wil uithaal, moet ek my voorraadrekening gaan krediteer en nou debiteer ek 'n nuwe rekening wat ek eers op jaareinde skep, koste van verkope. So die heel eerste inskrywing in my koste van verkope rekening gaan wees die waarde van my beginvoorraad. So krediteer voorraadrekening, ek debiteer koste van verkope. Dan gaan ek my aankoperekening afsluit teen koste van verkope. Onthou, reg hierdie finansiële jaar het ek nou al die aankope geakkumuleer in my aankoperekening. Aankope is 'n uitgawe, so uit 'n debitsaldo. So as ek hom wil afsluit, moet ek die aankoperekening gaan krediteer en ek debiteer my koste van verkope rekening. So wat lê nou in koste van verkope? Beginvoorraad plus aankope. Nou wil ek my eindvoorraad in my boeke gaan insit. En hoe sit ek eindvoorraad in boeke in? Voorraad is 'n bate, so die voorraadrekening gaan nou gedebiteer word met die waarde van die eindvoorraad en ek gaan my koste van verkope rekening krediteer met die waarde van my eindvoorraad. So nou gaan ek die saldo van my koste van verkope rekening uitwerk en hy word oorgeplaas na die handelsrekening toe. Guys, the balance on the cost of sales account with a perpetual with a periodic inventory system, that is transferred to the trading account. What is in the trading account? I close off my sales against the trading account, my cost of sales against the trading account, and the balance that's going to remain in my trading account is going to be my gross profit. Wat lê in my handelsrekening? Ek sluit my verkoperekening af na my handelsrekening toe aan die einde van die jaar. Ek sluit my koste van verkoperekening af na my handelsrekening aan die einde van die jaar. En wat is die verskil tussen verkope en koste van verkope? Bruto wins. So, ek het nou 'n voorraadrekening wat my eindsaldo is. My koste van verkope was beginvoorraad plus aankope min eindvoorraad en hy is afgesluit in my handelsrekening toe. En wanneer ek dan goedere gedurende die jaar verkoop, dan word daar geen inskrywing gemaak nie. So by 'n periodieke stelsel word slegs aankope transaksies na die aankoperekening toegeneem, maar daar word geen inskrywing gemaak wanneer daar 'n verkope transaksie plaasvind teen voorraad nie. Die verkope transaksie gaan natuurlik nog deur. Ek gaan nog steeds sê debiteer bank, krediteer verkope, krediteer BTW uitset. Guys, the sales transaction obviously will be posted. I'm going to say debit bank, credit sales, credit VAT output if there's a sales transaction and it's a cash sale, or debit debtors, credit sales, credit VAT output if it's a credit sales transaction. But there will be no adjustment entry against any inventory or cost of sales during the year. Geen aansuiwerings gedurende die jaar teen voorraad of koste van verkope nie. Okay, and that basically is exactly what I've said here in the second part of the thing. That I've just said, gross profit. Okay. So dis die einde van die storie. Are there any questions? Is daar enige vrae wat iemand wil vra of enigiets vra? Shoot.
Mevrou?
Ja.
Ek het 'n vraag oor asset disposal of ek dink batevervreemding in Afrikaans.
Ja.
Sê nou maar op die dag van die vervreemding verkoop ons toerusting vir R20,000, maar die toerusting is net R15,000 werd. Daai wins wat ons maak van R5,000, as ons BTW moet aanteken, is die BTW 15% of is dit 15 op 115?
Nee, as jy R20,000 vir die ding ontvang, dan sê jy daai 20,000 is gelyk aan 1.15. So die werklike prys wat jy in jou sak kan sit, so 20,000 gedeel deur 1.15 is gelyk aan 17,391 en dis die gedeelte wat na die bateverkooprekening toe gaan. Dan 15% van die 17,391 maal 15% is 2609. Ja, 2609 en daai bedrag gaan na die BTW uitsetrekening toe. So wat ook al die opbrengs is, vat jy en jy sê daai opbrengs sluit alreeds BTW in. So hy's gelykstaande aan 115. So ek gedeel dan vat dan die 20,000 wat die opbrengs is, deel hom deur 1.15 om my gedeelte uit te kry en dan maal ek daai bedrag wat my gedeelte is met 15% om die BTW gedeelte te kry.
Dankie mevrou.
Guys, the question for the English guys, she asked, if I'm going to sell an asset, and let's say the proceeds on that asset that I've sold, not inventory, a normal asset, let's say a delivery vehicle, whatever, and I receive 20,000 Rand for that vehicle, then what must I account for in my asset realization account? Then my portion of the 20,000 is all that I can recognize and I can use in order to determine the profit or loss on the sales transaction of that asset. So if I have received 20,000 Rand for this delivery vehicle, I'm going to take the 20,000, I'm going to divide it by 1.15, that equals 17,391, and that is the amount that I'm going to take to the asset realization account. Then I take the 17,391 times 15%, and that will go to the VAT output account, but the amount I'm going to recognize in my bank account is going to be the full 20,000 that I have received. Guys, I will always tell you whether you're working with a VAT vendor or not a VAT vendor. Ek gaan julle altyd vertel of jy werk met 'n BTW ondernemer al dan nie. Ek sal ook altyd vir jou vertel of jy transaksies doen met 'n BTW ondernemer al dan nie. Ek kan 'n algemene sin inskryf en ek kan vir jou sê die onderneming doen altyd besigheid met ander BTW ondernemers behalwe waar anders aangedui, en dan sal ek vir jou die uitsonderings aandui. Guys, I will always tell you whether you are working with a VAT vendor. I will always tell you whether you are going to transact with another VAT vendor or not. I may put in a general sentence, something in the line of the business always trades with other VAT vendors except where otherwise indicated. And then if it is not a VAT vendor, I will have to tell you so. But it's not a guess game. I will tell you whether you're a VAT vendor or not, and I will tell you if you then, if there's a general sentence, whether if you are going to do a transaction with a guy who is not a VAT vendor. Okay. Nog vrae?
Ma'am,
Yes.
does the drawings account affect the VAT control account?
Yes.
Okay.
Why?
Because I heard you said something like, since the owner, I think you said when the owner takes money out of the bank or something like that, it does not affect the VAT control account. Or you mean the capital?
Then it does no impact. But if he takes an inventory item, then there is a VAT implication.
Oh, okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Any other questions, guys?
Ekskuus mevrou. As 'n mens nou vandag deur al die oefeninge gewerk het van study unit 1 tot by 3, sal 'n mens alright wees vir die toets van donderdag, of is daar addisionele goed waardeur ons moet gaan?
Ja, chapters 1 to 8 in my book. Jy moet eers hoofstukke 1 tot 8 gaan in my book. Baie belangrik.
Okay.
En
dan
Jo?
gaan nou van ons verwag word om enige ander joernaal te doen as direk vergelyking, soos byvoorbeeld KWE. Okay, nee, ek moet net seker maak.
Ek sien ek gaan nie, maar ek kan.
En finansiële state so aan of nog nie?
Yeah, guys, there's no financial statements. The closest thing to a financial statement that you're going to get is the accounting equation. So daar's geen finansiële staat op hierdie stadium nie. Die enigste ding wat die naaste daaraan is die rekenkundige vergelyking op hierdie stadium. Ons doen finansiële state later in die semester.
En algemene grootboek, soos oorboeking?
Dit kan wees.
Okay, dankie mevrou.
Okay. Indien 'n voertuig vir meer verkoop word, as die waarde daarvan is in ons boeke, moet ons die volle uitgeslote bedrag oorboek na die bateverkoper, of moet die waarde oorboek na die batekrediet en die wins oorboek na die wins met verkoop. Ja, meneer Botha, gaan kyk wat is die inskrywings wat ek deursit wanneer ek 'n bate verkoop. Ek haal die kosprys van die voertuig uit en ek sit dit na die bateverkooprekening toe. Ek haal die opgehoopte waardevermindering van die voertuig uit en ek sit dit na die bateverkooprekening toe. Dan stel ek die opbrengs vir die verkoop van die bate te boek. Kom ons sê ek het hom kontant verkoop. So ek debiteer bank, ek krediteer die bateverkooprekening met die BTW uitgesluit bedrag en ek krediteer BTW uitset met die BTW gedeelte. En dan moet ek my bateverkooprekening gaan skoonmaak, want wat is die doel van die bateverkooprekening? Dis om die wins of verlies te gaan uitwerk met die verkoop van die bate. So nou gaan ek daai bateverkooprekening afsluit. As ek 'n inskrywing op die debietkant nodig het, op die bateverkooprekening, bedoel dit ek het 'n wins gemaak, so ek debiteer aan die bateverkooprekening en ek krediteer 'n wins met verkoop van 'n baterekening. As ek 'n inskrywing nodig het op die kredietkant van die bateverkooprekening, dan krediteer ek die bateverkooprekening en ek debiteer verlies met die verkoop van 'n baterekening. Guys, the question is actually a good question because I gather that a lot of students battle with this asset realization story. The question was, if there was an asset realization, what is happening? If there's asset realization, you have to remove the cost price of the asset out of the cost price account. So you create a cost price account, you debit the asset realization account. You remove the accumulated depreciation out of the accumulated depreciation account. You debit the accumulated depreciation account, you credit the asset disposal account, or the asset realization account, it's the same thing. Then you have to account for the proceeds. So you will debit the bank with the amount that you're going to receive. You're going to credit the asset realization or asset disposal account with a VAT exclusive amount, and you're going to credit VAT output with a VAT. And then you have to clean out your asset disposal account. It is just a temporary account. The purpose of the asset disposal account is to work out the profit or the loss on the disposal of the asset. So if you need an entry on the debit side of the asset disposal account to make it balance, then the credit will go to a profit on the disposal of the asset. If you need an entry on the credit side of the asset disposal account, then the debit entry will go to a loss on the disposal account. But the purpose of the asset disposal account is to work out what is the profit or loss on the sale of an asset. You can answer the conceptual framework questions in the test in a table format, or you can do it in a more essay type of format, but I would very much recommend the table format. It makes the application with the theory much easier. Die vraag is, moet ons die konseptuele raamwerk in tabelvorm doen soos die memos? Ek sal dit in sterkste aanbeveel. Jy hoef dit nie so te doen nie, maar dit is baie beter om dit so te doen, want dit verseker dat jy die toepassing van die scenario per lyn item van die definisie of die erkenningskriteria wat ook al doen. So ek sal dit aanbeveel dat jy dit in tabelvorm doen. What do we do with trade and settlement discount and VAT? What you're supposed to do with that. Guys, what's the difference between trade discounts and settlement discounts? A trade discount is something that I negotiate. So when I receive an invoice, it means that invoice value will be after the trade discount has already been deducted. What do I use as a source document when I post my debtors or creditors journal? I use the invoice. So if I use the invoice amount, then it means that the trade discount has already been deducted. What is a settlement discount? The settlement discount, an invoice has been issued, and it then states that if I'm going to settle that invoice within a certain time frame, I'm able to claim a settlement discount. So if the invoice was for 10,000 Rand, and I pay this invoice, let's say within 2 days, I can only pay 9,500 Rand. So am I ever going to pay the difference of 500 Rand? No, never. What is the 500 Rand? That's the difference between the invoice value and the payment value. Does invoices include VAT? Yes. Does payments include VAT? Yes. So does the 500 Rand include VAT? Yes. So that 500 Rand, I'm just going to say divided by 1.15, and that amount you're going to post, listen carefully, to sales. 435 Rand will go to sales, and then 65 Rand will go to my VAT account. So very important, I will debit sales, I will debit VAT input, and I will credit the debtors to clean out the debtors account. And just the opposite will happen if it's a creditor. Nou, Afrikaanse ouens luister baie mooi so, want julle raak teen mekaar en dit gaan jou lelik kos. Wat is 'n handelskorting en wat is 'n vereffeningskorting? 'n Handelskorting kry ek wanneer ek 'n spesiale prys beding het met iemand, met die verskaffer. Wanneer hy dan aan my 'n faktuur gaan uitreik, gaan daardie faktuur wees nadat die handelskorting alreeds afgetrek is. Of ek verkoop aan iemand iets en hy beding met my 'n spesiale verkoopsprys. Wanneer ek daai faktuur aan hom gaan uitreik, gaan dit wees nadat die handelskorting alreeds afgetrek is. Met ander woorde, die faktuur is altyd 'n weerspieëling van wie skuld wie wat. watter bedrag. Nou, wanneer ek my debiteure of krediteure joernaal gaan pos, wat gebruik ek as brondokument? Ek gebruik die faktuur as brondokument. As die faktuur al klaar die handelskorting afgetrek het, dan beteken dit die faktuur wat ek gaan pos in my debiteure of krediteure joernaal, gaan al klaar wees na die handelskorting afgetrek is. So ek pos die faktuurwaarde, die handelskorting is al reeds afgetrek. Nou wat is 'n vereffeningskorting? 'n Vereffeningskorting sê, as jy hierdie faktuur wat in jou uitgereik is, binne 'n sekere tyd gaan vereffen, gaan betaal, dan gaan ek jou 'n korting gee. So as jy my R10.000 skuld, maar jy betaal my binne 5 dae, dan hoef jy my net R9.500 te betaal. Gaan die ou, as hy nou binne daai tydsraamwerk betaal, ooit R10.000 betaal? Nee, maar volgens jou grootboek, wat skuld hy jou? R10.000. Nou ontvang ek R9.500 van hom. En ek pos debiteer bank krediteer debiteure R9.500. Nou sou nog R500 oor op sy debiteure rekening. Gaan ek dit ooit ontvang? Nooit. Wat was die R10.000? Die faktuurwaarde. Sluit dit BTW in? Ja. Die R9.500 wat ek van hom ontvang het, sluit dit BTW in? Ja. So die verskil van R500, die 10.000 minus die R9.500, sluit daai R500 BTW in, want dit moet, want die een sluit in, die ander een sluit in, so die 500 moet ook. So wat doen ek nou? Ek wil sy rekening gaan skoonmaak, so ek kort nog 'n R500 krediet op sy rekening. So ek krediteer sy rekening met R500. Wat debiteer ek nou? Ek vat daai R500 en ek haal die BTW uit. Dit gee vir my R435 en ek debiteer my verkope met R435. En die BTW dan, met ander woorde die R435 maal 15% wat R65 is, vat ek na BTW inset toe. So R435 plus 65 is R500, krediteer debiteer met R500 en dan het ek die vereffeningskorting te boek gestel.
Ekskuus mevrou, gaan dit in 'n aparte lyntjie gedoen word? Soos byvoorbeeld, dan gaan jy sê, die debiteure kontrole gaan die krediet met 500, dan jou verkope, okay.
Debiteer met R435.
Debiteer en
alles apart. Alles apart, lyn vir lyn. So everything.
Die eerste deeltjie eers en dan die tweede.
Ja, heeltemal reg.
Dankie mevrou.
Nou, hier is nog 'n vraag. In VAT transactions where the entity sells goods, we don't record the impact in the inventory and cost of sales account, only bank debtors and VAT output right. Yes, but only if it is a periodic inventory system. If it is a perpetual inventory system, you have to update your inventory and cost of sales account as you go along during the course of the financial year. What is the difference between a profit margin and profit markup? That is basically the same thing. A profit margin can also be, let me start with the markup. The markup means that I am marking up my cost price to derive at a selling price. So that's where the words markup comes from. A margin says I'm adding some kind of percentage to something to derive at something else. So profit margin is the percentage that I'm going to add to my cost price in order to derive at my selling price. So it's actually the same thing. Ma'am, what type of element is the asset disposal account? It's an asset. All asset disposal accounts, you can show under assets. That is the mistake that was on Brundle. I didn't see that. There was accidentally one that was posted under equity. It's not equity. Everything are asset disposal. If you have to do an asset disposal in the accounting equation format, put all the asset disposal entries under assets. As debiteer afslag kry, hoekom word VAT input gedebiteer en nie VAT output nie, want verkope werk met VAT. Yes, guys, the question is, if I'm going to grant a settlement discount to a debtor, why do we work with VAT input and not VAT output? It's very easy, because the receiver of revenue works the same way than what you used to work when you were at school. You work with a discount allowed expense account. Toe jy op skool was, die ontvang van inkomste werk dieselfde simpel manier as wat jy op skool gewerk het. Hy sê, toe jy op skool was en jy het vir 'n debiteur 'n korting gegee, dan het jy 'n korting toegestaan, uitgawerekening gedebiteer, nee, met daai korting. Nou hy sien daardie korting ook as 'n uitgawe en op uitgawes eis jy BTW. En dis ook 'n debiet wat in jou boeke deurgaan teen BTW inset, BTW. En dit is het gesê, alle debiete wat deurgaan op die BTW kontrolerekening is eintlik BTW insette. So guys, that discount allowed expense account, it's an expense account's got a debit. On that expense, you can claim VAT now. And because you claim the VAT, it's VAT input and not VAT output. So it is actually nothing to do with the original transaction. This is a second transaction that took place. The amounts are based on the first transaction, but this transaction is totally different from the first transaction. Ooh, Ms. Mashiri, kick yourself. Ma'am, when trade discount was issued, how do you issue a trade discount? When trade discount was allowed, do we still account for the entire VAT output? You always account for the VAT output which appears on the tax invoice. If the tax invoice excludes the trade discount, what is going to happen? The VAT output is going to be on the actual amount of the invoice that I have issued. So it is not a valid question. Do you understand it, Ms. Matredi? Okay, great stuff. More questions, guys? Ma'am, how do you know in the cost price per profit equals selling price formula when to add profit on sales or cost price to determine selling price? So you're talking about that P there, where I give you, when I say that the selling prices are determined by adding 40% on the cost price, then you know it's 100 plus 40 equals 140. When I tell you that the selling prices are determined by the entity by applying a profit percentage of 20% on the selling price, so you must read the full sentence, on the selling price, then the selling price becomes the 100. The profit is 40 still because it's 40%, so it's 40 on 100. Then the cost price then will become 60 plus 40 equals 100. So read your question very carefully. If I'm telling you that the selling prices are determined by adding something to cost, then cost is 100. If I'm telling you that selling prices are determined by some kind of profit percentage on the selling price, then the selling price equals 100. Okay. More questions?
Sorry, ma'am.
Yeah.
I just want to know something. I saw a question today. It was in one of the previous tests where it said basically this lady was the shop owner and then she took food or basically drawings in her case of 69,000. Okay. And then they said the selling price was 69,000 of the goods that she took. She adds 40% to cost price.
Wait. Did they give you the selling price, 69,000, was that the selling price of the goods too?
Yes, and then she adds, so they gave us selling price, which is 69,000, and then they said cost price, she adds 40% to cost price. So I was wondering for my entries, so to get that exclusive amount, okay, so with the 69,000, that output is going to be credited in the statement of financial position as 9,000, increase in liabilities. I was wondering drawings. Is drawings going to be 60,000 or is it going to be 42,857, which is 40% of 60,000? And then what are my entries going to be?
None of what you've said. Okay, let's do the first transaction. They bought inventory for 69,000 Rand. Is that the first transaction?
Okay, so it's basically the owner took the stuff.
The inventory with an invoice value of 69,000 for own use. Is that the question? The owner took inventory with an invoice price of 69,000 rand, or that inclusive price of 69,000 for himself. Is that what you've said?
Yes, selling price 69,000. Yes.
Is that the selling price? Okay.
Yes.
Right. So the first thing that you do is you take out the VAT. Then the remainder, the VAT exclusive price is then 60,000. You agree? Then
Yes, ma'am.
we said that the profit formula is they add 40% on the cost price to derive at the selling price. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. If you want to work out then the cost price, or okay, but the 60,000 was the purchase price of the inventory. Or, no, that was the selling price of the, no, that was the selling price of the inventory. You have to work back to the cost price, right? Okay. So you take in the 60,000 times 100 divided by 140. Why? Because cost price plus profit equals selling price. It's 40% on the cost price, so it's 100 plus 40 equals 140. So if I have the selling price and the VAT exclusive selling price is 60,000, then I'm going to multiply that by 100 divided by 140 to derive at the cost price,
Yes,
which gives me 42,857. Okay. Right, so my accounting entries is going to be, I'm going to debit drawings, and I will tell you the amount now. I'm going to credit inventory with 42,857. I'm going to credit VAT output with 642,649, which equals 15% of the 42,857. And I'm going to debit drawings then with the sum total of the two, the 42,857 plus 6,429, and that gives us 49,286. So what is the steps that you have to follow? Number one, take out the VAT out of the selling price. Number two, convert the selling price into cost. How do I convert it? By applying my cost formula. What is very important that you get your cost formula right. If the VAT exclusive selling price is 60,000 and my formula is 100 plus 40 equals 140, because our markup is 40% on cost, then I'm going to take my 60,000 multiplied by 100, which is the cost, divided by 140, which is the selling price. And that will give me my actual cost price of the goods equals 42,857. So that is the amount I have to adjust my inventory account with. So I'm going to credit inventory with 42,857. Then I've claimed VAT initially on the 42,857, and I have to repay the receipt of revenue, now the VAT. So I multiply the 42,857 with 15% to get the VAT. That gives us 6,429. So the cost price of the inventory plus the VAT portion will go to VAT output. If I add the two together, the sum total of the two will be debited against our drawings account, 49,286. Okay.
Okay, ma'am. So about that, that was also one thing I was wondering. Okay, I think I have an answer. I would just like, okay, so we had the selling price of 69,000. That was VAT inclusive. Then we took VAT out. So now we have a VAT exclusive amount.
Yeah.
From that, we subtracted the profit that we added. In this case, it was 40%. Then we got to 42,857. That amount, isn't that VAT exclusive since we already subtracted?
That is VAT exclusive, but the question is how much VAT did you initially claimed on that VAT exclusive amount? You claimed 15% on that amount initially when you bought that inventory, because inventory is recorded at what? VAT exclusive prices. So that was the VAT exclusive price that you recorded in the inventory account. So based on that amount, what was the amount that you've claimed for VAT when you bought the inventory? 15% of that amount. Okay.
That was a 6,429 then, which would have been VAT input at the stage.
Output. Yeah, it's a credit.
And when you bought it, it would have been.
It would have been input. Yes, yes, agree.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Are there any other questions, guys?
Ekskuus mevrou, gaan hulle vir ons sê ons moet 'n rekvergelyking doen op die periodieke metode?
Dat
Kan
kan,
dit gebeur?
ja, ja.
Okay. Is daar so 'n voorbeeld iewers in ons werk wat die rekvergelyking met die periodiek is?
Nee, ek dink nie jy het so 'n voorbeeld nie, maar al verskil daarso is die voorraad word aankope. En dan waar jy nou die lopende voorraadstelsel elke keer die koste van verkope voorraad aansuiwering gedoen het, daai inskrywing val net weg.
Dit val net weg, so dis net byvoorbeeld bank en verkope.
Ja, aankope. Voorraad gaan aan. Ja.
Dis wat ek bedoel.
Ja, debiteer aankope, krediteer bank. Dis al wat jy gaan wys. Okay. Guys, the question was if in the accounting equation, if I tell you it's a periodic inventory system, what should you do? It's exactly the same what you've done now. The only exceptions are you're not going to debit the inventory account when you purchase the inventory, you're going to debit purchases and let's say credit bank with the amount of the purchase transaction. When you're going to sell inventory, you're only going to have debit, debtors, credit, sales, credit, and output. But there's going to be no adjustment entry against inventory and cost of sales under the periodic system. If I tell you it's a perpetual system, then you have to do all those entries still. Are there any further questions? Okay, well, it seems as if I can be in the office now tomorrow. So I will be in the office now tomorrow, but not on Thursday. So I'll be in the office tomorrow instead of Thursday, not on Thursday. That is what the telephone call was all about. You see, it was very important for you as well. So I will see you then. I will be here on tomorrow. Should you want to come and see me, you must please make an appointment for a certain time. So you're welcome to come and see me if you want to, but you must just let me know so that I can make an appointment for you. So ek is môre op kantoor as julle my wil kom sien, jy moet net vooraf 'n afspraak met my maak. Juffrou Schwartz, Ms. Schwartz, if you want to, just give me a WhatsApp or something or email something. If you want to, you can come and see me tomorrow morning at 8:30. Not this afternoon. Okay. Right. Is julle almal happy chappies? Are you all happy chappies? Keep it like that, especially for the test as well. Guys, I wish you good luck for the test. Please read your questions very, very carefully. Also, what is very important is watch the clock. You don't have time for discussions or things like that. You should just get your paper out and start working on the paper, but make sure before we start answering your questions that you understand the question and you understand what the required part. Even if you have to read the question through more than once, it is 100% worth your while, because you can write 10 pages, and if that was not the question, then you don't get any rewards for everything, for all the effort that you put into. So make sure that you understand 100% what I'm asking you. Make sure that you write the correct answer, that you answer the question that was actually required from you to answer. And watch the clock. Afrikaanse ouetjies ook, seker julle daai Brits verstaan. Goed, as daar dan nog geen verdere vrae is nie, dan kan ons nou maar vir mekaar goodbye sê. So we can say goodbye to each other, guys. Good luck with your studies. I'm holding thumbs for you. Cheers.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye.